Welcome to the LG Wheelhouse. I'm your host, SirMikeKnight. With me, as always, is Hutch and Colonel. Joining us today is Golden Aces, the GM of Wilkes-Barre Scranton. Welcome, Aces.
Hey, guys.
All right, we're just going to call him Quinn, since that's what everybody knows him as in LG. So, Quinn, you've had a hell of a week. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, last week I was on my motorbike/scooter thing, and I was hit by another car, and it put me in the hospital for a while. I sustained multiple injuries, leg fractures, arm fractures, skull fractures, concussion, broken ribs, you name it, I have it basically right now. So it's been a pretty rough week. Yeah, that's basically all I can really say about it, is rough.
Right. Multiple injuries, and you have been on IR since. So yeah, that sounds pretty rough. Any idea when you'll be back on the ice? If you'll be back on the ice?
Hopefully in a week.
All right. So hopefully in time for playoffs, if Wilkes-Barre can hold out for playoffs. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about Bullet 92. Hutch.
All right, so over the past week, it came down from LG management that Bullet 92 has been banned. And of course, Bullet 92 has been putting up really big numbers here in the AHL and also in the CHL last season. So, it was quite the surprise for, everyone in the AHL to kind of see Bullet just get a ban like that. So, I kind of dug a little further into it and reached out to some sources that I had. And apparently this is how it all went down. So Bullet also played in the IOHL, and it was there that speculation first began that he was a second tag. And I mean, when you just sit back and look at it, very rarely in LG does someone just come out of nowhere and just absolutely rip apart the CHL and come up and, sit with the top guns in the AHL. So with all this speculation going on, the IOHL ran some tests and found a lot of similar occurrences between ML Jesus and Bullet 92. So as we all know, ML Jesus has been a guy who's been permanently banned from LG. He's been in here causing a lot of trouble in the past. So he's really a guy that LG doesn't want back in the community. And, it seems that, every season or two he manages to find his way back. So the IOHL management contacted the LG management with the info that they had gathered. And upon further testing and research on LG's behalf, it was determined that, indeed, that, this was a second tag of ML Jesus. And, from here, what happens? Obviously, I truly don't believe that Springfield management had any idea that, Bullet 92 was ML Jesus. I mean, Horton and Winston Payne seem like pretty straight shooters to me. And, I mean, when you think of it as well, Columbus drafted him in the NHL draft this season, so he was kind of given to them. They didn't really reach out and get him. I'm not entirely sure if the Columbus management knew if this was ML Jesus or not, but I mean, I guess that's something for LG to decide.
Yeah, Colonel.
It's really tough to, see who's a second tag and who's not. I mean, you look at Triss's software, whatever he uses, his procedure to try and figure out, if everyone's been using the same IP address and all this stuff. It's really tough to nail down, okay, for sure this is the second tag, because there's so many advantages of the second tagger, we'll say, the person trying to become or have a second tag. I mean, people can plant tags in the CHL as prospects one season, and then they'll, mature into veterans or whatever, and they'll find their way around. So ML Jesus has been doing this for a while. We actually had a second tag scandal when I was GM of Syracuse in season 19 in the AHL. ML Jesus had a second tag called Mysterion, And I remember my NHL owner was telling me earlier in the season that he heard this Mysterion guy was good or whatever, and we should pick him up in bidding. But we ended up we had bids on him, but he went too high for our liking. And then about, I don't know, halfway through the season, your team, Mike Wilkes-Barre, they got busted for having 2 second tags on their team. They had Scrivens 30, who was known as Bishop on Wilkes-Barre, and then you had Mysterion, who was really ML Jesus. And the two of those, and at the time, their management said like they did not know that either of them were second tags. However, they were up near the top of the league in standings, and they had, I think Bishop had played like 30 games or something for him at that point, and maybe it was 20, I can't remember, but it was quite a number of games. And everyone was crying for him to overturn all their games and stuff because, you know, the whole rule, if there's an illegal player, then it's a forfeit and stuff like that. But the league left him alone because they couldn't prove that um, the management knew that it was a second tag or not. They just didn't know. So it was very controversial. We'll say that, and we're seeing it here again now. Um, that Bullet 92 is a second tag. I mean, I doubt that Springfield will lose any of their games because, like Hutch said earlier, we don't really think they knew he was a second tag. It's really hard to tell. But when the guy comes into the CHL and he tears it up and gets like 130 points or whatever he had, I mean, that kind of raises red flags. So it's not like normal people who sign up for LG and it's their first time. They wouldn't just come into organized sixes and dominate at even at the CHL level. Yeah, it's watered down right now, but it's not like he's going to come in and just dominate everyone and get, what is it, 6 or 7 points a game, maybe more. I don't know what the average is on that one. But yeah, it's tough to stop, and I guess you got to just applaud Tris or whoever busted them, really, and just keep trying to shut them down and try our best as a community to, you know, figure out who's second tags in the league and try to get them busted and get them out of our league because we really don't want people who are really skilled going down at other levels and ruining the competition for everyone else.
Now, Quinn, you played against Bullet 92 when you were the GM of the CHL last season. Anything to say about Bullet 92's gameplay?
For me, it's a little surprising. Like, as you guys know, I haven't really been around for the past week and a half. But just as these guys said, it's really surprising for a guy to come into the CHL and put up that kind of numbers. Like, we obviously on Chicoutimi had firsthand experience in playing against him, and obviously at the time, how on earth would we know that that could be a second tag? But it's a little interesting to find out now that that's a second tag, and it can possibly raise doubts as if that series could have changed. But it's in the past now. That's last season, so. But it's I guess up to the league, as these guys said, to determine if Springfield knows if it was a second tag or not. But as you guys said, I feel the same. I highly doubt it. It happens all the time. It's the guys sneak through. How are people to know? They pick them up based on skill. So I just think it's really interesting, and I'm curious to see what happens coming forward with this issue and possible issues like this in the future.
All right. So I guess we're going to move on. Two-Tone gets waived. Hutch.
All right, so the last couple of weeks has been a really interesting timeline here for Two-Tone, and I'll really go into the more recent timeline. On August 25th, he was acquired by Grand Rapids from Lehigh Valley, and then on the 28th, Grand Rapids waives him, and then on the 29th, he's claimed by Springfield. So I don't know if any one of you guys really know Two-Tone or not, but last season, season 20, he played for Binghamton. And he actually went 23-7-0, 37 goals, 62 assists for 99 points. So usually someone of this caliber doesn't just get thrown on waivers. It really caught me off guard. So I done a little bit of digging, and I reached out to some sources, and apparently, from what I've been hearing, the Grand Rapids management actually placed Two-Tone on waivers by mistake. They actually meant to place a guy that was sent down from the NHL team on waivers. And apparently once Two-Tone was placed on waivers, there was nothing that the administrators could do. So of course, to verify that this claim is true, I reached out to our BOG, Titus, and he did actually validate this rule. Administrators will not reverse a mistake. As he said himself, there are several checks put in place to ensure that a manager does not make this mistake. So, it kind of raises a couple flags here as to how Two-Tone got placed on waivers by mistake. You know, all of us here have management experience, and I'm sure all of us have been into the management tools, and it does indeed give several warnings. Do you want to waive this player? Do you want to send this player down? So I'm a little confused how Two-Tone gets placed on waivers. I mean, I guess things do happen by mistake. Maybe it was an early morning, late night kind of thing. I'm not really sure. But when you're talking about a player like Two-Tone who can really change, the momentum of your team and can really change things around, you got to be really careful what you're doing.
Yeah. Aces. We had Two-Tone at the beginning of the season. Anything to say about him?
Well, as Hutch said, he's a really good player, so I was really surprised to see him on waivers. But in regards to them saying it was an accident, like, I mean, there's maybe only one possibility I could see, and they clicked on him thinking he was somebody else and did it. I don't know, but it happens. But that's just really unlucky for them, regardless. And it's just unfortunate to lose a player like that because I know he is good. And I don't think he'd get waived unless it was something per availability or argument with management or whatever. In terms of us, we only got rid of him because we wanted him to play at an NHL level, and our NHL owner did not want to call him up because he had his roster already, or something along those lines. So we decided to move him, and it wasn't because of his skill or anything. He was a really good player, and it kind of sucked to let him go. But as management, you have to make those decisions. So we'll have to see what happens with that in the future. But yeah, so that's really all I have to say about that.
Colonel.
I've played with Two-Tone before. He's like Ace is saying now. He's a pretty good player, and it's very strange to see a good player on waivers unless there are underlying causes. And usually one of those causes is not an accident. I know when I was a GM, I guess I was really meticulous with my button pushing on the site because like I triple checked and quadruple checked every time before I made a move. So I mean, if these guys are competent managers and they're saying that they are, it's extremely strange to see them on waivers. I'm not sure. Maybe there's something they're not telling us. You really don't know, and I guess we might never find out. But either way, whoever picked him up off waivers is definitely making a big addition to their squad if he's got good availability or his connection is, if he's got a good connection and all this stuff. I'm not quite sure who picked him up. Was it Springfield, Hutch?
Yeah, it was Springfield, and I think by Springfield picking him up is an excellent replacement for Bullet 92. I'm not sure exactly how their lineup will change with Two-Tone in there, but losing a guy with like Bullet 92, in terms of talent anyway, replacing him by Two-Tone, I think that they made a really smart move there. There may have been other teams placing claims on him, and that may have been why they placed the claim on him in the first place, but nonetheless, it looks good on their behalf. They're getting another guy in here with a high talent level, and he'll probably come in and, replace Bullet 92.
It was a great pickup by Springfield. That's exactly what they needed, losing their top scorer to a second tag. Like, to pick up Two-Tone and fill that hole is kind of like a blessing. Because normally, at this point in the season, you can't replace him, right? You've got to try to make ends meet from your training camp, and they just basically had a great player handed to them in their lap. They had the waiver priority, and they got him. So, hats off to Springfield.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to roll right into the NHL 16 beta. Quinn, I know you haven't had a chance to play this since you've been in the hospital, so we will roll on to Hutch. Hutch, what do you think about the beta?
Personally, I think the beta is great. I think it's really good on EA to actually give us a chance to look at what we're going to get before we actually go ahead and purchase it. I know last year with NHL 15, I was really disappointed. I had already pre-ordered and paid for the game and then heard that, we're not going to have EA SHL this game. It's pretty well going to be HUT 15. Just having the Xbox One and purchased it for that reason, I still went ahead and got the game. The gameplay was perfect, and I won't go as far as to say perfect, but the gameplay was great, the graphics were fantastic, and it didn't have EA SHL, which was one of my favorite game modes, and of course that extenuates to playing LG. So I think on EA's behalf, it's great on them to release this EA SHL beta to us to get it really tested and make sure that there's no glitches and no bugs before it comes out in NHL 16. In terms of playing myself, I've spent most of my time playing goalie. Of course, the goalie controls are completely different from the old gen. I think that they've made a lot of great strides in terms of revamping the whole goaltending experience. There's a little, I think there's a little bit of adjustments to be made. I think, the whole goalie hugging the post thing, and, there's just a little bit of touchiness in the net. But, I think that given time, I think people will adjust to the new button layout. And personally, I think that most goalies will find this a way better layout than it was before.
All right. Colonel?
I think the beta is awesome. I really enjoy it a lot. It's similar to NHL 15 on the Xbox One, but it seems like they've really taken into account a lot of what the game changers have been trying to tell them. So that's Nuge and Tony Farrelly and those guys who are going to Vancouver and sitting on a committee with EA and trying to work, to make our EA SHL more competitive and more balanced. And I think they've done an excellent job bringing up stuff, for EA to focus on. Because really, when you're developing this game, they've got a limited budget. I know everyone says EA's like, they've got tons of money, but really for the NHL series, it's not as popular as some of their other games. So you got to think what budget gets, distributed to the NHL series. And for what it's worth, for what they've got, the tools, they've got a limited amount of staff and time to try to get this game as good as possible. And going from 360 to the Xbox One was a big leap. So it was tough for them to get everything in on time back in 15 when it was released. So I think in the long run they made the right call, because instead of getting like an EASHL that was broken and not balanced at all, I think they really took their time and they made the right move. So I've from what I've gathered and from what I've played maybe 20 or 25 games on the beta right now. Sixes is really balanced. It seems really excellent. Like the fact that everyone can kind of just go in, pick your own build. You don't have to worry about grinding for your legend card anymore. It's just everyone's on the same playing field. There's none of these like glitchy builds that, oh, I'm a 6'9" grinder, so I can just skate through everyone and score. There's none of that. Like you've got to pick your strengths and weaknesses, and it's really interesting. Like I haven't had enough time to play around with it and say, okay, well, this is the combination of forward line that'll help. And it kind of depends on who you're playing against, because if you're playing against a really strong cycle team, you might want to go with a little more physical build, or you know what I mean? Like it's tough to decide what you're going to pick, but it's like rock paper scissors. There's something to beat everything, so it's balanced in a way. No one can say, oh, you only won because of your build, because the builds are all there. So I really like that they've taken out the whole progression system. And I also think that this beta is going to be our demo, because they're not releasing like a formal demo like they've normally done in August. So basically we got our demo a month early, or 3 weeks early, and I know we only get a week, or 7 or 8, maybe 9 days, whatever it is altogether with the beta. But this whole experience is going to help. Is going to be back to them early enough for them to like customize the game a little bit more to our liking, because the community is obviously giving them feedback based on whether they like the beta or not. So it's really going to be awesome in that way. And what do they get out of a demo, really? It's just like, here's the game. You try it. If you don't like it, don't buy it. If you like it, buy it. Like, it's really not helping develop the game at all, but this beta is definitely.
Definitely. And before we move on, there are like a couple things that I've noticed too. There's no club scouting. So, in LG next season, I'm just curious how, the whole OCR thing is going to work. I know there's a box score, and I know you could go in and look at individual player stats, but it's no longer connected to gamer tags. So I'm just curious if EA is actually going to add in the club scouting thing so we can get this all set up, and so LG will run smoothly next season. So, I guess it's not necessarily a priority for EA, but it might be something that LG has to handle, going down the road.
All right, and going on to the beta, I like the gameplay. I like a lot about this game, but there are a lot that needs to be fixed too. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed, but that's why you put it on a beta, right? You get the feedback, That way you can try to fix it before the game starts. So hopefully they get some of this stuff fixed. I know a lot of people are having trouble actually getting into games. I was the first like 20 games I tried to play, I kept getting failed out. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I love the beta. I love the gameplay. So moving on, we are 1 week, right, away from playoffs. This is the last week. So let's start talking about playoff races. Hutch.
All right, so I'm just going to break down the Eastern Conference playoff race first, and these stats we're taking as of Friday. Before I get into it, I'll explain. We're going to examine 5 teams, number 7 through 11, who are really on the bubble of the playoff race. So we'll start off with the Eastern Conference, and at number 7 we have the Hershey Bears. They're currently sitting with 55 points. Last week they went 6-3-0. This week they're playing Lehigh Valley, they're playing Providence, Bridgeport, Norfolk, Springfield, Hartford, Portland, Manchester, and Syracuse. 6 of which these teams are either in the playoffs or on the playoff bubble, and 3 are currently sitting in the playoffs. Number 8, we have Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, currently sitting with 54 points, 6-3-0 last week. This week's schedule, they have Portland, Manchester, Hartford, St. John's, Syracuse, Bridgeport, Norfolk, Springfield, and Albany. So all of these teams that are playing next week, they have 7 of which that are on the bubble, and 4 that are currently sitting in playoff spots. Number 9 on the outside looking in is the Manchester Monarchs. Currently sitting with 51 points, there's only 3 out of the playoff spot. They were 3-3-3 last week, so kind of mediocre week. This week they're going to be playing Syracuse, they're going to be playing Wilkes-Barre, Albany, Binghamton, Lehigh Valley, Charlotte, Hartford, Hershey, and Bridgeport. And of those teams I just listed, we have 7 that are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, and 5 of which who are currently sitting in playoff spots. Number 10, we had the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. 48 points. Last week was 2-7-0. Probably not a great week heading into, the stretch here. But this week, they're going to be playing Albany, Lehigh Valley, Hershey, Springfield, Norfolk, Wilkes-Barre Scranton, Worcester, Binghamton, and Manchester. And of those teams I just listed, 8 are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, with 7 of them already in the playoffs. So that looks like a tough schedule ahead for Bridgeport. And then we have Hartford sitting at number 11 with 48 points. They were 4-5-0 last week. And this upcoming week, they're going to be playing Providence, Albany, Wilkes-Barre Scranton, Syracuse, Worcester, Hershey, Manchester, Portland, and Springfield. And of those teams, 7 are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, with 6 currently sitting in the playoffs. So of those teams, I think that, there's a lot of moving room. But I think that Bridgeport probably has the most difficult schedule. And as you move up through and you see Wilkes-Barre and Hershey, they probably have, the more advantageous schedule heading into the last week.
Colonel.
It's going to be interesting for sure because you really never know what's going to happen. It's just 1 week. It's like one team could have a great week and end up in a playoff spot, and it could be, some of the bubble teams might only have to do average if a couple of we'll say the 7 and 8 seed, if they really slip, they could only have to get maybe 4 or 5 wins, and they might be looking at a playoff spot. It's really tight. So of those teams Hutch listed, I think 2 that will get in are I've got a really good feeling about Bridgeport. I think they've got a tough schedule, but they've always had a tough schedule because really I don't know if anyone in the East or Northeast gets a break. So I think they're going to make a push. They've got more regulation wins than Manchester right now. Manchester's making it up on the overtime losses. So I think Bridgeport's going to make a push. I think they'll get in. And, I think another team that'll get in is the Hershey Bears because I've seen that they've actually had good performances as of late. And they've got one of my buddies, Schneider. He's like top 20 in league scoring, and that's really hats off to him. So I think he's going to push his team through, and they'll hold on to one of their seeds. So we'll see if Bridgeport can take out those baby pins.
Ouch. All right. Now, Quinn, you got anything?
Yeah, just for the East, the race all season has been really tight, especially on our side. And I think that it's been pretty consistent in terms of who's been on in the playoffs and who's been out. That's why I think that right now the two teams that are in 7th and 8th are going to make it, us and Hershey. Not trying to be biased or anything, but I just think that last week, even with a bunch of our call-ups to the NHL after the whole debacle up there, we were able to deal with it and still pull out a 6-3 week with asterisks next to that. So, or 7-2, I forget what it was. Anyways, yeah, so I think we'll do good. And Hershey's been fairly consistent all season, never playing too bad, never playing extremely well. But yeah, I think that we're going to be the two teams that make it just because of that. It's just consistency, really. And there's a little bit of a point spread between places. So I think that that's going to be who makes the playoffs in the East.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that we're missing this week is you, since we got everybody back. So I do, I mean, again, not to be biased, but I do think Wilkes-Barre Scranton is going to make it. But I also think that Bridgeport's going to get in. Bridgeport has a really solid roster. Nothing against Hershey, and I hope they prove me wrong. But I think those are the two teams that are going to make it in. So moving on, we're going to go to the West, the Western Bubble.
All right, so in the West, we have at number 7 the Rockford Ice Hogs. They currently have 52 points. They were 7-2-0 last week, so they've really done a great job of securing, or at least giving themselves a little room there in the playoff spot. Looks like this week they will be facing off against Hamilton, Utica, Rochester, Charlotte, the Lake Erie Monsters, San Antonio, Toronto, Milwaukee, and Adirondack. So of those teams I just listed, 6 are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, and 4 are currently in playoff position. Number 8, we have the Toronto Marlies, 46 points, 6-3-0 last week. This week they'll be facing Milwaukee, Iowa, Lake Erie, Grand Rapids, Texas, Chicago, Rockford, Charlotte, and San Antonio. And of those teams, 6 are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, 4 of which are currently in playoff position. So as we move down, at number 9 is San Antonio Rampage. They currently have 41 points, 5 points out of the 8th seed. 6-2-1 last week, so they're really stepping it up here in the playoff race. This week they're going to be facing the Grand Rapids Griffins, Milwaukee, Chicago, Hamilton, Charlotte, Rockford, Utica, Iowa, and Toronto. 6 of which are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, and 4 that are currently sitting in the playoffs. Number 10, we have the Hamilton Bulldogs, 38 points, 8 points out of 8th. Last week they were 3-6-0, 2 of which games were forfeits. It kind of looks like they're having a bit of a rough time there with their GM kind of going on vacation on them there. This week they're going to be facing Rockford, Grand Rapids, Iowa, San Antonio, Milwaukee, Texas, Lake Erie, Oklahoma City, and Chicago. 7 of which are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, and 5 teams that are currently in the playoffs. Number 11, we have the Iowa Wild, 38 points. They're currently 8 points out, 5-3-1 last week, so they're still fighting for their cause. This week they're going to be facing Chicago, Toronto, Hamilton, Adirondack, Rochester, Lake Erie, Grand Rapids, San Antonio, and St. John's. 6 of which are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, and 4 of which are in the playoffs. So it kind of seems like a common theme that, most of the teams that they're going to play are either in the playoffs or on the bubble, considering that there's only, 3 teams from each conference that's not included in this. But the more important thing is, each team will be playing almost half their games against playoff teams, so there's still a bit of time to make up those points that they're trailing Toronto for the 8th seed.
Right. I'll start off here. And I mean, it's going to be really tough for any of those teams who are not currently sitting in a playoff spot to make it up there. I mean, there's a 7-point gap between the Marlies and the Rampage. And unless the Marlies have an absolutely terrible week and the Rampage have a great week, there's really, I mean, let's just say I'm going with Ice Hogs and Marlies, 7th and 8th. I mean, it's going to be really tough for any of those outside teams to get in the West. Colonel?
You never know. I mean, the Marlies could end up forfeiting a few games for having an extra defenseman on the roster. You don't know. That's a joke. I think it's going to stay much the same. It seems like the playoff gap is just a bit too much. I don't think San Antonio's got, they've got basically a snowball's chance in hell of passing the Marlies, because as soon as the Marlies win another couple games and San Antonio loses a couple, it's going to be tough. They would literally have to win out, and the Marlies maybe win 2 or 3 the most. So I don't see it happening. They're definitely not catching the Ice Hogs, who've got 4 more points than the Marlies. So I think you're going to see the Western playoff picture, stay pretty much the same. You might see some movement in between in the mid teams, like you might see Texas, Utica, Lake Erie, and Rockford jump around a little bit. Even the Marlies might be able to get a better seed than 8, depending on how they do this week. But yeah, it's going to pretty much stay the same. I can almost guarantee it.
All right. Quinn.
Well, yeah, I'm just gonna go with what these guys said. Like, I haven't really obviously been around this week, so I haven't really been seeing what's going on. But uh, as I said about the East, it's been tight all season. But then you go to the West, where it's been pretty widespread. So I think that even just that gap is basically what's gonna secure the 7th and 8th seed their playoff spot. So I think it's going to stay as is. I don't think there's going to be any movement really whatsoever, other than, as Colonel said, about the inter playoff movement about seeding and stuff. But I think the 1 through 8 is going to stay how it is.
All right. So Hutch, let's get your power rankings.
All right, so once again, I'll start off with the Eastern Conference. There's a bit of a shake-up here in the power rankings. Generally from week to week, they're pretty similar, but, there was a bit of a shake-up this week. We have at number 1, moving up from number 2 last week, the Norfolk Admirals. 8-1-0 last week. They had big wins over Binghamton, Worcester, and Manchester. Currently sitting first in the East, yes, they passed Syracuse, with 66 points, and they have a 4-point cushion on Syracuse. And, of course, they're being led by Sebi, head swiper 73, and goaltender Gray without error. Number 2, an unranked team last week, the Binghamton Senators. 6-2-1 on the week, with big wins over Norfolk, Worcester, and Manchester. They're currently sitting 4th in the East with 61 points, and they're being led by Sox fan 744, Ric Flair, and goaltender Bagsy 37-13. Number 3, staying right where they were last week, Syracuse Crunch. 6-3-0 last week, so a bit of a better week. 2nd in the East with 62 points. They have a 3-point cushion on the 2nd place Springfield in the Eastern Northeast. And they're being led by their GM Prowsey, Ambient Gumba, and their defensive pair of Cynical and Delican. Number 4, we have another unranked team last week, the Hershey Bears. 6-3-0 on the week. Big wins over Manchester, Wilkes-Barre, and Binghamton. And I will point to that because, Manchester and Wilkes-Barre are right on their tails. Currently sitting 7th in the East with 55 points. And they're being led by Elf Landaman, Mindfreak 38, their goaltender Marshall Soros, and of course our buddy Schneider 42. Number 5, we have the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. 6-3-0 last week. They had big wins over Manchester, Worcester, and Binghamton. Sitting 8th in the East with 54 points, they're currently 3 up on the 9th place Manchester, and they're being led by Convict UT and Jesus Stick.
All right. Can I just start by saying I called it? Anybody? Anybody watch the show last week? Admirals, number 1. Told you. Anyway.
That doesn't
Colonel,
mean anything, Mike.
It means everything. It means everything. They didn't just take over first place. They're beating you by 4 points.
Yeah, that's no big deal.
I told you last week they were going to take over, and they did. You guys
they haven't played us though.
Go ahead and get
fine.
butthurt all you want, and I'm sure I'm going to hear it from you guys' fucking teammates and in the comments down below.
No,
but
just wait. I'd rather you could play them in the first round and put them out for us.
There you go.
Yeah, right. Anyway, Colonel.
I agree with Hutch's power rankings for the most part. He's got it right on the money. Norfolk had a great week. We had like a mediocre week, and they managed to get up on top of us for now. But we're going to claw and see if we can get back. I mean, we're only 4 points behind. We might be able to catch them. They can pretty much determine their destiny for first in the conference. If they win out, obviously we can't catch them. So, we're just trying to clinch our playoff spot, and whenever that happens, we'll be happy. We don't really care where we finish in the standings. We'll finish fairly high. We should be able to get at least home ice in the first round if we stay consistent for the last week. So I'm not too worried about all that.
I guess not. Hutch, let's go to the West.
All right, so in the West, we have moving up from number 2, and this may be a surprise to many, but I think the Rochester Americans really deserve the number 1 spot this week. 7-2-0 last week. They have big wins over Albany, Syracuse, and Utica. Currently sitting second in the West with 63 points, but they're only 6 points behind Oklahoma City now. So, I mean, Oklahoma City had built that, humongous lead, but it seems like Rochester has been slowly and quietly climbing their way up through, and they're right there behind them now. And of course, they're being led by strong performances of Hertz, their AGM N of 63, their GM Army of 1, and of course, their right defenseman, Sims QC. So, number 2, dropping down from number 1 for the first time in a long time, the Oklahoma City Barons. Very mediocre week last week, 4-4-1. They had wins over Texas, Grand Rapids, and Lake Erie. Currently sitting first in the West, 69 points. Now, they do have a 15-point division lead over Texas, so I think they're sitting pretty comfortably there. They're being led by Laffy Taffy, Legendary McFly, and this week, Leprechaun 205. And of course, this week, we have Leprechaun heading to the IR, but Brodeur is returning, so they've kind of been having like a little, IR tag with their goalies. Kind of interesting to see what's going to happen, but it seems like with one goalie on the IR, they really suffered, so it's going to be the same thing this week. You're going to have Brodeur returning. Leprechaun is going on the IR, so it'll be interesting to see how they work out this week. Number 3, we have the Rockford Ice Hogs. 7-2-0 last week. Big wins over OKC, Grand Rapids, and Texas. They've done a lot of work to really get themselves in a comfortable position in 7th. They have 52 points. They're 2 points behind Grand Rapids for first in their division. And they're being led by Super Tom 111, Nazi 19, and their goalie Sack 99. Number 4 this week, moving down from number 3 last week, is the Texas Stars. 6-1-2 on the week. Big wins over Lake Erie Monsters and Grand Rapids. Currently sitting 4th in the West with 54 points. And they're being led by Pack the Ka, John 27, Voracek 13, and Maxwell. And I'll make a note right there. Of course, last week when I said the power rankings, I pronounced the name wrong, and Mike was quick to correct me on that. So I'll make sure I don't do that again. Number 5, we had the San Antonio Rampage. 6-2-1 last week. Big wins over OKC, Grand Rapids, Texas, and Lake Erie. All guys ahead of them in the playoffs. Sitting 9th in the West with 41 points. Only 5 points behind the 8th seed Toronto. They're being led by strong performances of Blackjack MVP, Savage NS, and Bull Breed 333.
All right. So, Oklahoma City. You see a little downfall from them. A 4-4-1, huh? That's not a very good week. And I guess it does have to do with their goaltending being out, and with Leprechaun being arguably their best goaltender being out this week. Ugh. I mean, they pretty much guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. What do they? They need to win 2 games in order to stay. They win 2 games this week, they're in, and they lead the they lead their division. So I'm not worried about them staying in the playoffs or even winning the division. But I mean, are Rochester going to catch up to them? If they I mean.
Yeah, and I think they have a really strong chance. Like I said, Leprechaun is heading to the IR. We know how well they done last week with one goalie. I don't know. I mean, I think that Rochester has a legitimate chance. They're only 6 points back. That's only 3 wins. And if they have another strong week, another 7-2-0 week, and Oklahoma City stumbles a bit, it could be interesting going on to the last couple games.
Absolutely, Colonel.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. It's like if Leprechaun is to Oklahoma City what Mindhunter was to me, and he was my AGM in season 19 of Syracuse. He was like our star in net, so he definitely won us a lot of games single-handedly. And like I said, from what Leprechaun's stats look like, I mean, he's got an 85 save percentage. He's stopping most of the pucks he sees. Because if you're only getting 7 or 8 shots in a good sixes game, he's stopping 7 of them. So really, it's tough to score on OKC. But now that they've got one goalie left and Brodeur's kind of like their backup, he's still really good. There's no doubt about that. But can he live up to Leprechaun standards? We don't know. And Rochester's been doing great this last week with Hertz is making some noise. Hertz, Ennis, and Army of One is Rochester's top line. They've been doing really well this past week, and I think if they can put up another week like they had last week, they could easily catch the Barons and pass them. I mean, they've only got a 6-point gap. It's 3 wins that they've got to get, and it's totally doable in a 9-game week. Like, there's no doubt about it. So, look for Rochester to possibly overtake the Barons. It really rests on their goaltending shoulders if they can get a good ECU for the games Brodeur can't play. And you know what I mean? It's going to be interesting to see who finishes number 1 over there.
Right. Ace, is anything?
Yeah, just kind of touching on the top 2 there. It is, as these guys said, it is going to be really interesting to see, sorry, who finishes number 1, because as they said, the goaltending is out, and really it comes down to how Brodeur plays, because even if they ECU a goalie 3 games and they lose those 3, as long as Brodeur wins 4 or 5 out of his, they should be okay. So it really comes down to how their depth is going to show, and if they can pull off a better week than last week. Because if they go 4-4-1 or even possibly 5-4, they could be caught with a 9-0 week. So it's going to be really interesting to see the race on both sides, really, especially seeing if Oklahoma will surrender that top spot.
All right. So moving on, we're going to move over on to the players to watch. Hutch.
All right, so I'm just going to go dig right back into what we were just talking about. I think one player to watch this week is Brodeur 30. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on him. He's got a lot of weight to carry on his shoulders. Oklahoma City is a team that really depends on their goaltending and their defense. They're not a high-scoring team. As we all know, he didn't play last week. On the season, he's 5-3-0. He has a 2.60 goals against average. He has a .798 save percentage. So those numbers are great to LG standards. And, as I was just saying, he's 5th in the league in goals against average, 4th in save percentage, 6th in wins. He just missed a full week. It's kind of interesting to see, if he's going to come back in and he's going to pick up where he left off, or, if Oklahoma City is going to continue to stumble and kind of lose ground in Rochester. So I think he's really a player to watch this week.
Colonel?
I think really my player to watch is Hertz, but in reality is more Hertz and his line mates, because I'm sure they all work together. But Hertz right now is ranked number 2 in points. He's got an 11-1-3 record. He's got 32 goals, which is a fair amount behind Zalman. I don't know if he's going to catch Zalman or not in the goal scoring race, but he's only 6 points behind him, so he might be able to pull that off. The guy is like, it seems like he does it all. He's got 56 hits, which is a lot for a forward who's getting like 61 points. So he scores goals, he sets up plays, and he makes hits. I think you're going to see him possibly overtake the point scoring lead if Rochester has a week like they did last week. So watch out for Hertz.
All right. And Quinn, you got anybody?
No, really, just because I've been out, but I am interested to see how Brodeur does this week, coming back off IR. That's really all I have to say.
Right. All right. I'm going to go Homer. I have to. We're sitting on the bubble. We need some big weeks, and the big week we got this week for some Convict UT. He really led our offense, and we need him to step up and do the same thing this week in order for us to secure our playoff spot. So I'm going with Convict UT.
Yeah, and I think before we move on there, another guy I'd really like to mention, and we kind of touched on it earlier in the show, is Two-Tone on Springfield. I think that, he's been thrown around a bit this season. He came into Springfield last week. He was 1-1. He didn't have any goals. He picked up 4 points. Last week he fitted on the line of Horton and Blake 89. But I just find it really difficult to look past last season where he had 99 points on Bennington. This guy is, he's a player. And I think for them just claiming him off waivers and the whole losing Bullet 92, I think it was an excellent pickup. He may take a little bit of time to adjust, but I think by the time the playoffs roll around, I think that he's going to be ready to go. And I think that, their offense is going to really pick up where it left off when Bullet got called up and eventually got busted for the second tag.
Right. To elaborate a little bit more on Convict, the week he had was spectacular. A 10-point week with 7 goals. So that means he got 3 assists. He really led in the 2 wins that he had, because of course one of them was the one of the wins that was overturned due to us playing a guy that got called up. But yeah, so little elaboration on convict there. So we're gonna move on to teams to watch. Being in a playoff race, we're really gonna look for that team that's gonna step up and when it matters most, right? So Hutch, what's your team to watch here?
I'm sorry if it kind of seems like I keep going back to this subject, but I think a team to watch is Oklahoma City. Like it's been the first time all season that they've stumbled, and being so late in the season, maybe it's the goaltenders going on IR. Who knows? We're not in the locker room. We don't know what's going on. But I think that they're a team to pay close attention to. The 4-4-1 week. Although it's not a horribly bad week. It's kind of an eye opener. After all those dominant weeks that they put out. They had, critical losses to Milwaukee, Iowa, Charlotte, and San Antonio, who are all sitting out of playoff positions. I know, though, that, these teams, when they face top teams, they're always going with their top lines and stuff. But, losing 4 games to non-playoff teams, that's very critical. And as we mentioned before, we have Brodeur returning this week, Leprechaun leaving. And, this little stumble has narrowed their conference lead 6 points up on Rochester. So I think that moving forward to this week, that that's a really interesting concept to look out for, and there's going to be a lot of people watching Rochester to see if they can actually overtake Oklahoma City. So all eyes are going to be on the whole OKC Rochester debacle there.
All right, Colonel.
I think my team to watch is going to be the Bridgeport Sand Tigers. I just got a feeling that they're going to have a good week, and I think they're going to really push hard to make that playoff spot happen. I don't know whose expense is going to be, if it's going to be your guys or Hershey's, possibly even Albany. Who knows? But the Monarchs are in there too. It's going to be really interesting to watch the East bubble race. I think you've got a really close race towards the President's Trophy. Like you've got the Admirals and Crunch and Sharks and Senators all around the mid 60 point mark. Then you got the Barons and the Americans in the West. So there's like 6 teams that's possible to come up and take that President's crown. So that's an interesting race to watch. But the playoff race in the East is definitely going to be fun to see who makes it in those bottom 2 seeds. So I'll give it to Bridgeport. I think they're going to have a strong week. I think they're going to come out swinging.
All right. I apologize to anybody listening. Quinn had to drop out. He's at the hospital still, and he doesn't have the best connection. So he ended up dropping out, and he told me he's just going to go to sleep. He's not feeling well, and I know he hasn't talked much this entire episode, but we really didn't expect that. I actually didn't expect him to stay as long as he did. He did say he was probably going to end up dropping out. So moving on, we were talking about teams to watch. Now I'm going to give 2 sets of teams to watch, and it is the number 1 race in each division. And we're going to talk about the Admirals and the Crunch, and them being only 4 points separating them, and see who gets the, and see if they can even catch the Barons as far as the Presidents go. And then the Barons and the Americans. I mean, both these races for the top spot are going to be very interesting to watch. The only reason why I bring these up instead of the bottom teams is because we already had a section for the bottom teams, right? So the Admirals and the Crunch, which I think the Admirals are going to keep first place. No offense, Crunch. And then the Barons and the Americans. Now that one's tough for me to call. If Leprechaun was in, I would say no problem. OKC's got this. But with Leprechaun out, I don't know. I mean, they had a 4-4-1 week without their backup, well, their second string freaking goaltender. So with Leprechaun being out, how bad are they going to do? I don't know. Rochester's been doing amazing. They had a 7-2 week last week. So, I mean, that's going to be a tough one to call. So there's my teams to watch. Now, let's go with game of the week. Hutch, what's the game of the week?
All right, and we're going to touch back on what we've been kind of reiterating all show, and I think the game of the week, Oklahoma City versus Rochester Americans. This game is going down Sunday, August 2nd at 10:30 p.m., and of course, it's first versus second in the West, and I think that this game could go a long way in determining the seed, or the end seed in the West. If Rochester can get in there and gain those 2 points on Oklahoma City, that's instantly closer they move, and there's only 6 points separating the two. So, I obviously think that this is an important game for both teams. I mean, obviously they're both going to make the playoffs, but, who wants to get that first seed? And, either of these teams could be the one to step up and grab the President's Trophy. So I think that this game is an excellent choice for Game of the Week, and I think that there's going to be a lot of eyes on this game.
I'm going to have to absolutely agree with you on the Barons and the Americans. That's going to be an absolutely sick game to watch, and I hope they Twitch it because I want to watch that game. Because that's going to be an automatic 2 points if the Rochester Americans can come up with a win, right? And with being 6 points behind, that's a pretty important game. Now, it's also an important game if OKC takes it. If OKC takes it, then they pretty much secure their spot in the number one. I say pretty much because it's always possible that they lose out the rest of the games and they only end up going 1-8, and then Rochester goes 8-1, and that's their only loss. But it is a tough. That's going to be a great game to watch, and I hope somebody Twitches it. So that's all the time we have at this episode of the LG Wheelhouse. And from myself, Hutch, and Colonel, thank you for listening, and we love the comments.
Leroy, you were just stupid as hell.
At least I have chicken.